Okay, time for a new book. We are in Vayikra, the middle of the Torah, or some might call it the heart of the Torah. Vayikra gets a bad rap, as we discuss every year, by a lot of people who find it boring. But if you really want to understand what God is giving us as instructions of how to live and how to feel, Vayikra is kind of where it's at. We get lovely and amazing and very important civil legislation. Much of it was in Mishpatim. A lot more of it's going to come in the book of Deuteronomy.
I didn't get a notice of this.
Is it working? Is there a problem? I know, that's not her.
No,
It says it's working. In any case, we get lots of civil legislation. We get, of course, all the narrative. But in Vayikra is where we get much of the discussion of our relationship with God as individuals, not just as a nation, but as people, individual people. And so it is a shame that it does not get as much attention, because much of the Torah is designed not only to create a nation of Israel and not only to see that nation's place within the world and about bringing about the betterment of the world. It's also about the individual's journey in their relationship with God. So ignore Vayikra, ignore Leviticus at your peril. With that in mind, we're going to talk about when we've made mistakes. So we're going to be on page 595 if you're in the Eitz Chaim, which is chapter 4 if you are using any other copy of the Torah. Chapter 4 of Leviticus. Okay, we all found our place? Excellent. Could I impose upon you?
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people thus. When a person unwittingly incurs guilt in regard to any of the Lord's commands about things not to be done, and does one of them..."
But don't turn the page.
Oh.
What could come next? All right, what are our options?
A punishment?
A punishment, right? If you accidentally come into my house and you knock over a vase, right? Because we're talking unwittingly here. This is definitely without intentionality.
But the commandment is do not knock over a vase.
Yeah, you don't break other people's property is kind of, a big deal in Jewish law. So if you normally, if you break something in my house, even if you did it by accident, what is the result? You pay it, right? You break it, you buy it. Right, we all understand that if you break, an object, you will be paying for it. It doesn't matter whether you meant to or not. If you deliberately pick up my vase and smash it, I'll be a little more annoyed. But really, the end result is going to be much the same, which is you will be paying for the replacement. So we might just expect a punishment to be on the next page.
But would it make a difference if I walked in and I stepped on your carpet, but it turned out to be a brand new carpet that you wanted people not to step on, they should walk around?
So whether or not it's a transgression, whether or not you've done something wrong can sometimes be open for a debate, right? So if there is a deadly spider going across the floor and I take the vase and I throw it at the spider to kill it and I save your life from that poisonous creature, then that may not be considered a breakage that has to be repaired and paid for, right? You may have actually benefited me by doing that. So that's why we have courts, so that we can investigate all the different activities. But in a perfect ideal world where we can say it was an accident and it was not a good thing that this happened, you'll be paying for it. So in general, we would expect that if there is a crime, if there is a transgression, if there is a mistake made, intentionality can play a big role in exactly how we define it, the difference between murder and manslaughter, for example. But that there will be some phone call. This is another, I swear, these robocalls are absolutely annoying. I'm getting about 8 a day.
Block them and it doesn't make any difference.
No, they just said they can spoof new numbers like that. Blocking the number matters not. Train of thought, we would expect that intentionality might make some difference, but that there's going to be a punishment for, or at least a consequence, to use the modern term, for your action. Have that in mind as we continue reading.
So, if it is the anointed priest who incurred the guilt, so that blame falls upon the people, he shall offer for the sin of which he is guilty a bull of the herd without blemish as a purification offering to the Lord. He shall bring the bull to the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord, and lay his hand upon the head of the bull. The bull shall be slaughtered before the Lord, and the anointed priest shall take some of the bull's blood and bring it into the tent of meeting.
Okay, wait a minute.
What?
So what's the scenario here? Who are we talking about first?
The priest.
High priest.
The high priest, right? We are talking about, the Kohen. So the Kohen has done something wrong. The Kohen's done something wrong. All right, so first of all, let that sink in, that the first example of an accidental error we're going to talk about is the accidental error of the Kohen, right? We're not starting off with the accidental error of Mottel the tailor. We're talking at the top of the pyramid rather than the bottom of the pyramid. So the high priest or any priest has committed an error, and notice there's something additional about this error that most of the rest of us never get called into.
Bringing guilt upon the
Okay,
Yeah.
causing problems for the rest of us, right? So, for example, if the priest makes a ruling which is an error, but the rest of us are abiding by that ruling, and therefore we also are committing new errors because of his determination, then not only has he done something wrong, he's caused us to do something wrong. So there's a knock-on effect, a domino effect that can happen from somebody like a Kohen making mistakes. Thankfully for the average person, if you make a mistake, it's just you. But if you're in the position like a Kohen and you make a mistake, then that mistake gets multiplied by however many people are following after you. It's, the lemming brigade. Although, true fact, lemmings don't actually all jump off cliffs. But Disney actually arranged that for that movie.
This is an unwitting mistake that you made.
This is unwitting, absolutely. And there are different ways that we handle deliberate mistakes, where it's not a mistake in the English sense, but it's a deliberate transgression. But this is definitely things where it is unwitting or unknowingly or accidental, many different ways to try and define that word. Okay, so he's made a mistake. His mistake has had an effect on other people as well. And therefore, he has to what?
Slaughter a bull?
What did the bull do? It wasn't the bull's mistake, right? The bull didn't make the problem. Why is a bull being sacrificed here?
To atone for the priest.
To atone for the sin, right? Okay, it's purification, right? It's kapara. It's atonement. How? Explain the mechanics of that for me, right? If my food has gotten cold, then I will put it in the oven to warm it back up, and I can explain to you how that heat transfer works, right? What's the transfer, sin, transgression problem? How is this fixing anything?
It's because we're supposed to see the bull being sacrificed
Uh-huh.
and know that was for our sins and put us in that position.
All right, so many commentators, most famously Ramban, Nachmanides, argues that when we see a sacrifice, we should imagine ourselves as being on the altar, and therefore we say, whoo, thank God it's not me. This is in exchange, right? It's the same way that we had a ram instead of Isaac during the binding of Isaac by Abraham way back in Genesis, that this is a substitute. I should have been punished, but I'm not being punished. So there is definitely an element of self-reflection that is implied here, but that doesn't quite work because sometimes you are allowed in certain circumstances to substitute other types of offerings that can go all the way down to things that have no pulse. It's like, oh, that could have been me, that bundle of wheat. It doesn't work perfectly all the way across.
It's public. And so people are going to see, so just as people saw and heard the initial mistake which caused others to stumble, for example, people will see that something's going on.
But so is a speech.
Yeah.
The guy could just get up and say, all right, everybody, my bad, I did it wrong, sorry, all right, just everyone, yeah, what I did, not good, sorry, carry on. I mean, it would be easy.
The only thing that I can see is that the times that we lived in were where other people were doing these kinds of sacrifices. And if God had us doing something mental, or we wouldn't have related well. This is, more primitive times. So in order that we not engage in idol worship, he said, okay, if you're going to see other people sacrificing out, you do it to me.
Right. So in previous years, we've also discussed this idea that sacrifices were not God's request. It was God's acquiescence to our own instincts of that generation. where everybody you sacrifices as a means of worship. And if we hadn't, we would have anyway. The same way that if God hadn't given us anything physical, we were going to make something anyway. So that the sacrifice was just, all right, fine. I know you're going to want to do something like this anyway, so here's what you can do. It's kind of like the friend when you ask them, what do you want to say? No, you don't have to give me anything. They know you're going to buy some stupid gift for them they don't want. It's safer to say, well, it might be nice if, and then insert something that, okay, fine, would be okay. Because they're going to get you a gift. They're not going to listen when you say, don't get me anything. So it's easier to just tell them at least not a bad thing. So that way it will be helpful.
But like with the king, it said, if you have a king, here are the rules. So how come it doesn't say, if you sacrifice, these are the rules? It says you must sacrifice.
Or more specifically, how come it doesn't say, if, that this is going to happen, right? It's this is what you will do, right? You are going to sacrifice because you need to sacrifice, meaning you have the need, whether you realize it or not. And therefore, when you come to sacrifice, this is the way you will do it and when you will do it. These are the reasons why you will sacrifice and what you will sacrifice, which is, again, why we get so much detail. The more detail you get, the more likely it is the Torah is trying to curb our enthusiasm from going down unhelpful and hurtful avenues.
What do the commentators say as to why there's no recompense, correction of the error?
Well, is there or isn't? All right. So we already had.
That implied.
Well, so there's already an implication, at least according to the rabbinic understanding of all of this, that no sacrifice works without contrition. And we see that in other parts of the Torah quite explicitly. We also see it in the Psalms and other parts of the Bible very explicitly, and many of the prophets as well. We'll repeat that sacrifices without the emotional state that goes along with them is pointless. And a sacrifice without the remedy for what you've done is also a pointless waste of time. So it definitely appears to be assumed and built in. But the question might be even more to the opposite, which is, why isn't it worse? I mean, why isn't there like, you will have to offer 100 bulls? So you will have to offer, 1,000 bulls, or you'll have to offer, your firstborn child, or maybe God isn't going to go into murder, but how about, making the penalty higher? Especially if you are a Kohen and you've made a mistake that's led to other people, is one bull enough? Right? I mean, it seems perhaps almost trivial to be asking that of us. But the question then would become, is the detail of what God is asking us for a repair of our relationship with God, which is really what the sacrifice is designed to do, does it matter exactly what God is asking? Is that a fixed measure, an objective truth that this is officially the appropriate amount of sacrifice needed in order to express publicly and personally that you are seeking to reestablish a unblemished relationship with God? With that in mind, because that's definitely a rhetorical question, with that in mind, we're going to look at an example where someone poses that precise question. And thankfully, I didn't even have to print this one off, so I get my bonus sheet without having to cut down more trees, because it's a haftarah. So I'd like you to take a look at the haftarah for Tazria. We're on page 673. We're going to skip the first few lines, no offense, but we're going to focus on chapter 5 of Kings 2, second book of Kings, which actually is still the first book of Kings, but it's a convention to divide them into two books that we've adopted. 673 if you're an Eitz Chaim, but it's chapter 5 of the second book of Kings. Lachim Bet. We all good? Okay. Wonderful story. Would you mind continuing?
What verse would you like me to start with?
Number 1, 5-1, top of the
5-1.
page.
Oh, I thought you said 6-1.
Now we're skipping chapter 4, which is the end of chapter 4, which is the bottom of the other page.
Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was important to his lord and high in his favor, for through him the Lord had granted victory to Aram. But the man, though a great warrior, was a leper. All right, I'm not going to repeat this too many times in this, but remember, leprosy is not leprosy. When it says leper, it's talking about him being a metzora. Metzora is someone who suffers from tzara'at,
Tzara'at is often translated as leprosy, but Tzara'at is not what we would recognize medically as leprosy. It was a spiritual affliction that had a physical appearance that was similar to the disease that we might call leprosy today. Good? Good. We're going to go ahead and just keep using the translation that's there, which was leprosy. But what do we know about this guy? What do we know about Naaman? Where's he from?
Aram.
All right, so he's from Aram. So is he Jewish? No, right? Aram is one of our neighbors, and it's one of the neighbors that we've often had trouble with. And in particular, we've just gotten over a rather nasty business in chapter 4, where Ahav, who was the king of the northern kingdom of Israel, just got killed by the Arameans. So this is not exactly our buddy kingdom that we're talking about here. So this is Naaman. He is a great guy up there. He is a warrior, and he has Tzara'at. He has this condition. Good? Good.
Once, when the Arameans were out raiding, they carried off a young girl from the land of Israel, and she became an attendant to Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "I wish Master could come before the prophet in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy."
All right, so what's happening here?
The young girl
Mhm.
who is Jewish
Right?
recognizes, oh, there's this thing you have. I know somebody.
I know somebody who could do this, right? I know a prophet. I know a guy. He's back in Samaria, which is the northern part of the kingdom of Israel, or the northern part of Israel, and he could take care of this. Who is she again?
She recognizes
A young girl
Right, young girl.
from Israel,
from
the land of Israel.
She was kidnapped.
Oh, yes.
She's
It's just we're totally blowing past the fact. She was a captive of war, right? They came and raided Israel, and they stole her from her family, and they forced her to be a slave to this guy's wife. And while she's a slave, foreign land, totally, stolen from her family, or maybe they were murdered, we don't know. She's giving advice. Think about that young kid. I mean, what kind of presence that she has. Well, she's definitely smart,
She's a
right?
survivor.
But she's a survivor. But think also of the risk that she's taking, right? She's offering a solution, but the solution is back amongst her people, right? That's I believe the technical term is chutzpah, right? Oh, if only you hadn't been murdering people in my land, you could walk in and get some advice, right? But this is the position that she's in, and this is the advice that she's offering. But we just have to make sure that we fully understand the situation she's in, and really the impressive character that she's displaying. Okay, so this is her advice. Go to Samaria, and there's a guy there that could heal you.
Naaman went and told his lord Aram just what the girl from the land of Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, "Go to the king of Israel, and I will send along a letter."
All right, so why send a letter to the king? He doesn't want the king to heal him.
Doesn't want the king to kill him.
Well, Aram is in a position of power, right? The northern kingdom is subjugated by Aram, which means they're basically like a tributary at this point. Or at the very least, they're extremely weak compared to Aram. Like I mentioned, Aram just killed their king in the last chapter. So it's not like they're on great terms, and Aram seems to have the upper hand. But this is kind of what you do when you're the boss, right? I'm going to send a letter, and I want you to go to him, and I'm going to tell him to take care of you, right? Because I can order him to take care of you, because he's my underling now. He better know his place, which, if you are the king of Israel, is kind of a really annoying circumstance to now be in. All right, because that's in fact exactly what's going to happen.
So he set out, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing.
Right, these are all gifts. These are all gifts.
Oh.
Right, the 10 changes of clothing is not telling us about his wardrobe. It's talking about the gifts that he will bestow upon the one that does this miracle for him.
He brought the letter to the king of Israel. It read, "Now when this letter reaches you, know that I have sent my courtier Naaman to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he rent his clothes and cried, "Am I God to deal death or give life, that this fellow writes to me to cure a man of leprosy? Just see for yourselves. He is seeking a pretext against me."
Right, so the king sees this as being, oh, come on,
Yeah.
right? You send somebody for me to cure, And then when I fail, you're going to use that as a reason to either attack or extract more tribute or somehow make my life worse than it already is. And you're just setting me up for failure, right? This is just a diplomatic ploy as having an excuse to injure us more, right? The king is thinking very politically here. And in most circumstances would be right, were it not for this prophet waiting out in the hillside.
Yeah. When Elisha, man of God, heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes, he sent a message to the king. Why have you rent your clothes? Let him come to me, and he will learn that there is a prophet in Israel.
Right, what are you worried about? I'm here, right? Send him to me, and we'll show him. Now, we're not only going to show him, of course, we're also going to show the rest of Israel that there is a prophet, which means even more emphatically that there is God. So this is exactly how Elisha is doing this. Everyone remembers Elisha is the guy who took over after Elijah, right? It's always easier to keep them in the Hebrew, Elisha and Eliyahu. So much clearer, Elijah, Elisha. The English is unfortunate.
Why would they have to go to the prophet? Why wouldn't they say to the prophet, come here?
Excellent question. Excellent question. And I want you to hold on to that question as we see the interchange between Naaman and Elisha in the next few lines, because the question of who's going to who is paramount in this particular story.
So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and halted at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, go and bathe 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be pure. But Naaman was angered and walked away. I thought, he said, he would surely come out to me and would stand and invoke the Lord his God by name, and he would wave his hand toward the spot and cure the affected part. Are not the Amanah and the Parpah, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? I could bathe in them and be pure. And he stalked off in a rage.
All right. So what's the who's going to who? What's the issue here?
Well, he wants to go to the Jordan because that's going to cure him.
Well, so that's what Elisha offered, right?
Elisha said.
But notice, Naaman pulls up on his chariots, right? Comes up in his limo, and he does not go in to Elisha. Right? He's already been made to go to Elisha rather than Elisha come to meet him at the palace. Out there, and fine, he's humbled himself enough to go to this prophet guy. But the prophet guy doesn't even have the decency to come out and greet him.
Or invite him in.
Well,
To even see what's.
he needed to be invited in to see Elisha, but he was not going to ask permission to enter, right? He's a general, for crying out loud. So he is on his high horse or chariot, and Elisha doesn't even come out himself. He sends a messenger and then tells him to do something that just seems trivial and mundane and stupid. And what does this guy say? Like, I was expecting him to come out, he says explicitly, and do his whoa mumbo jumbo. I love the description there. And then, that would all be fine. Whoa, you're going to tell me to go bathe? I mean, like, this is the cure? I mean, come on. If you think I've never had a bath in my life, that's why I have leprosy, is because I just haven't gone in a river. We've got rivers at home. Why did I come here? He's just enraged. This is his personality, right? He is clearly arrogant. He is clearly very much dominating of the people around him. And he is not expecting or used to anyone treating him as though somehow he is anything less than, second to the king. And he goes into this rage. However, thankfully, he has advisors.
His servants came forward and spoke to him. Sir, they said, if the prophet told you to do something difficult, would you not do it? How much more when he has only said to you, bathe and be pure?
All right. Beautiful logic. Right? This is what we call Kal v'chomer, where it's, from the minor to the major, which is to say, if he asked you to do something hard, you would have said yes, right? If he had said, I need, 100 bulls to be sacrificed, you would have done it. If he had said, I need, 1,000 talents of silver, you would have done it. And you probably would have done it happily, thinking that this was somehow what was going to affect the change. If you would have done the hard thing, why won't you do the easy thing? Now, psychologically, can we figure out why he doesn't want to do the easy thing?
Anything that's easy is worth it.
Exactly. Right? You get what you pay for. Right? How could this be a real cure if it's that easy? if it was that easy, everyone would be being cured, right? It's got to be hard. It's got to be fancy. It's got to be expensive, or else it's not really worthwhile. This is the consultantitis, right? The higher the price you pay to the consultant, the better his advice must be, right? Because, I wouldn't have paid $50,000 for a consultant if his advice wasn't amazing. It's like, but actually, shouldn't you pay based on the advice, not on what? Anyway, that seems to be the issue here. Naaman is not used to the idea that maybe it's not about the quantity of effort that you are putting in or the material that is being spent that is going to achieve the result. And that's precisely why Elisha is giving him this set of instructions. Because this set of instructions is not about how to cure his sara'at. It is about how to cure his own spiritual problem that is causing the tzara'at, right? That is where they are on two different pages, right? Naaman wants his disease fixed. Elisha wants his spirit to be fixed. And they're not hearing each other. Well, Elisha is hearing him, but he's not paying attention because what he's talking is nonsense. All right, so what happens?
So he went down and immersed himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had bidden. And his flesh became like a little boy's, and he was pure.
All right, so just beautiful literary moment here where, remember our little girl at the beginning, the slave?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Now he's become like a little boy, right? What was her status? Slave. Now, what has he done? He has actually humbled himself, right? It's not only his flesh that he's become like a little boy, his self has become more like somebody that is humble. And it's because they're identical, except for the gender, words used for both him and her. So it's just this lovely parallel that the text weaves in that is gone in an instant. Blink and you miss it. So I tried to hopefully hold your blink for a second.
Yeah. Returning with his entire retinue to the man of God, he stood before him and exclaimed, "Now I know that there is no God in the whole world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant." But he replied, "As the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept anything." He pressed him to accept, but he refused. And Naaman said, "Then at least let your servant be given 2 mule loads of earth, for your servant will never again offer up burnt offering or sacrifice to any god except the Lord. But may the Lord pardon your servant for this. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow low in worship there, he is leaning on my arm so that I must bow low in the temple of Rimmon. When I bow low in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord pardon your servant in this." And he said to him, "Go in peace." So Naaman left him and went some distance away.
Less shalom, a good reminder of the appropriateness for that particular exit for somebody that's still alive. Right, lis shalom, exactly. Seeing the consistency of that poetic form in the Tanakh. So this question of gifts, remember, he came with tons and tons of cash and all these other, change clothes and everything. And he offers them to Elisha in gratitude for what's been done. And Elisha says, no, I won't take anything, right? And instead, it then flips again with Naaman now having to be the one making a request, right? So in a sense, Naaman was trying to reestablish the relationship into his more familiar territory, which is you do something for me, I do something for you, right? Because we are equal partners, or maybe even I'm dominant, and I can now bestow because of my dominance and you will accept. And Elisha's not having it.
So really, up until the end, he's still thinking of this as a transaction.
Well, he is. I don't know if that he's thinking. I think he's already begun his transformation, but his old habit is still there.
I think that this is a transaction, and this
Exactly.
So this is I see this now with Leviticus. This is not a transaction.
Exactly right. Right.
This is not a transaction going on here.
If you cheapen it by making it a transaction, then you've missed the whole point. If you think, to go back to Leviticus, that the cow we give God is somehow making God happy, and that's why God is forgiving us, then you've missed the whole point of all of this, right? We give the cow because God has already chosen to forgive us, and we are expressing our willingness to establish the relationship from our side as well. And that, is something that Naaman is having trouble letting go of. But Elisha is helping him along the way by saying, no, if I take anything, it cheapens what just happens. And instead, Naaman does another step forward and says, okay, fine, then I will humble myself even further by asking for dirt. Right? Again, the exact opposite of gold and the exact opposite of the change of clothes and the silver and all of that. Instead, he's taking dirt with him because he realizes that the dirt is a connection to the land of Israel, and that's more precious than all the gold and silver and changes of clothing, and that it's something he can't get back in Damascus. Again, to parallel literarily the whole idea of, aren't our rivers better than your rivers? Well, apparently in the end, he's come to the conclusion that our dirt is better than their dirt. Now, there's still a level of materialism here, where he is feeling that God is somehow connected to the land of Israel. And so he's taking it back almost like like an embassy, a little sovereign piece of soil of Israel to have in his backyard for doing, religion there. So there's a little bit of a hang up for I need some stuff. But the fact that he chooses dirt is very telling that he has flipped his hierarchy of values from gold to God.
And the other thing is, just a few paragraphs ago, he said, my water is just as good as your
Exactly.
water. Now he's saying, I need your dirt.
I need your dirt.
Your land, but maybe your stuff is better than mine.
Oh, because he's definitely feeling your God is better than ours, right? And that's why he's saying, yeah, I'm still going to have to, as part of my official duties, go into a bowing posture in front of this temple for this other God. But understand, I'm only doing it because the king next to me is pushing on my arm. I'm not doing it because I'm actually worshiping. Right? Because I'm rejecting all of that idolatry now. Okay, so
About the fuel loads of dirt, it goes on to say, for your servant will never again offer up burnt offerings or sacrifice to God except the Lord.
Yep.
And Elisha had given sacrifice to other gods before.
No. This is Naaman.
This is not Naaman.
But it says, and Naaman said,
Yeah.
on and on and on, with no change in quotes, there was no end quotes.
Right.
So it sounds like that's
Naaman.
Elisha talking.
No.
No.
Wait,
So verse 17,
all right, I'm so confused.
Okay, hold on.
Why is Naaman asking then for dirt?
because Naaman plans to build his own altar back in the land of Aram. And he will then offer his own sacrifices to God in Aram. But he wants to do it on the dirt of Israel.
I don't know why. I was thinking Elisha was asking.
Well, no, don't be, there's this wonderful pronoun game that happens here.
Yes.
Plus, there's the my servant phrasing, which gets really awkward in certain passages of the Tanakh, where, wait, my servant? Who's my servant, right? Well, no, when someone says my servant, it usually means me, right? Or your servant means me. So he's saying, Elisha, he's now even going further by saying, I am your servant, and I will take this and do this. Make sense? Okay. So let's take a look at some of our commentary. We're on some commentators. We're going to flip back to Leviticus talk, and then we're going to flip into our discussion of Naaman as well and try and hopefully tie them all together.
So this is from the beginning where if the high priest does something wrong?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Unwittingly. Some commentators see this as an allusion to the Talmudic rule that errors committed by a scholar are accounted as if they were deliberate, because their standing in the community does not permit them to be careless.
All right, so an accident when you're responsible doesn't count as an accident. If I drop my knife at the dinner table, that happens, no problem. I'll pick it up, clean it off, whatever. If I'm a surgeon and I drop my knife, that you can't say, people drop knives. If you are in the midst of surgery and you drop a knife and it causes damage to the person, you're responsible for that. You can't just say, oops. It doesn't work like that. That if you're in a position of authority and especially necessity, that accidents that could have been prevented count as being deliberate negligence, because you should have been more deliberate in avoiding them in the first place. As I've said, and my children really have learned to quote this back at me with some irony. When they say, oh, I didn't mean to. And I said, yes, but you didn't mean not to. It's not just a question of I didn't try to do it. You also were not trying to avoid doing it. Right? There has to be a proactive protection, not only just no intention of ill will, that you have to be creating a bubble of I'm trying not to cause bad things. So this is why there is this penalty and this need for a special ritual for a priest that's different than the rest of us.
When speaking of the sin offerings by such high priests and the sin offerings being burned up, The customary statements that this will be a source of pleasant aroma for God is missing.
Right. So all the time we get a sacrifice, it says reach nichoach, right? There will be this pleasant aroma. And that's usually used as being something to say God is sort of accepting or approving of the sacrifice that's happened. That little phrase is missing when we read about the sin offering of the priest. And they're using that to teach us
that the high priest's negligence has not yet been forgiven completely, even though he has offered the requisite offering.
Right? It's not just about the sacrifice. There needs to be more, especially in the case of the Kohen Gadol and the high priest. Right? Because of his office, because of his standing, and because of the propensity for people in those positions to make mistakes without wanting to admit them, he can't just go through the motions. There has to be more from him spiritually before God will really say, we're good, right? And settled. Good. Also on that same theme.
Midrash Tanhuma, as well as the Yalkut Shmoni, have the following comment on Leviticus 4. When a person unknowingly commits a transgression in respect of any of God's negative commandments, etc., they say that this verse teaches us that transgression of any prohibition is equivalent to transgression of all of the Torah's commandments.
Right? Why say any? Why use this all-inclusive term? Why not just say when you transgress a commandment? Right? Why? Because it teaches you that all of them are equal to each other.
Conversely, the Reishi Chochma writes in Parsha Naso that if one performs a single positive commandment in all its pertinent details, it is as if one had performed all 248 positive commandments. The reason, of course, is there is no mitzvah that does not contain some element of all the other mitzvot. Having said that,
right, so let's make sure that we get the idea here. That he's basically saying that there's a web of mitzvot, right? Don't murder has a connection to don't steal, which has a connection to not committing adultery, which has a connection to not violating Shabbat, which has a connection to putting a parapet on your roof. There's some thread between every mitzvah and every other mitzvah, right? So between one mitzvah, there's at least 612 lines that come out of it that connect to every other mitzvah. Somehow there is a connection, there is a similarity, there is an interrelatedness.
Even the negative ones.
Of course, even the negative to the positive and the positive to the negative. That there is always some way that you can understand one mitzvah by the light of the other or as having a connection to the other. And that means that if you do one properly or improperly, you are essentially also canceling out or performing all the others as well as almost like a ripple effect. Right? You can't just say, well, I only did this. Like, yeah, but when you did this, you were also denying that, and you were violating this, and you were impinging upon that. It's not, there's never just one mitzvah that you can surgically remove from the Torah and not have all the others be affected. And there's no mitzvah that you can do which doesn't also have a good crossover effect, a positive crossover effect towards the observance and fulfillment of all the other commandments. Right? Positive leads to more, and negative leads to fewer.
So it's like the ripple in the pond,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what, if it's positive or negative.
It will
the
impact
ripple
everywhere
and
else.
It's gonna hit,
It's going to push every lily pad there.
wow.
Frog jumps off one pad, lands in another. All the other pads move. Doesn't matter that they're not connected. I mean, visibly on the surface of the pond,
Right.
the waves are going to make them all move. All right, onward.
having said this, we understand why transgression of a single negative commandment is viewed as if one had transgressed all of them, seeing that it involved negation of those particular elements of all the other negative commandments that were associated with the single negative commandment one flouted.
All right, which is a more complicated way of saying what we've just discussed,
Yeah,
which is
right.
you break one, you break them all. Right? There's no way that they're all tied together. It's like pulling something off a shelf, but it's tied to everything else. You pull everything else off the shelf at the same time. But this idea then is that when you choose to break a commandment, or you are careless and break a commandment, is that there is something fundamental that is going wrong in the system. It's not just, oops, I did this. There's some underlying issue that is allowing you to cause all of this to come crashing down, even if you thought it was a minor thing. It's so minor that you weren't even paying attention and it happened by accident. And that level of hubris almost, of arrogance, that I can do this, or I don't need to worry about that, is one of the underlying causes of where we end up in our Haftarah, where we end up with this situation of Naaman. Because we need to look a little bit more at who he was and what he had done and why he has this problem in the first place.
And the Arameans had gone out in bands and had brought away captives from Eretz Israel, a minor young woman, Na'ara Ketana. And this verse raises a difficulty to us. A minor and a young woman? How could she be both of these?
Right. How can you be a Na'ara and a Ketana? Right now, we can say little girl, and that sounds perfectly normal in English. And as you saw within the Hebrew, even the phrase little girl and little boy was being used as this lovely poetic parallel. But the Talmud doesn't always deal in poetics. It wants to have meaning that goes beyond just, style. And they're saying there's got to be another level of why we're saying Na'ara and Ketana, right? There's something redundant there, or maybe even contradictory. It'd be like saying, my teenage girl. It's like, no, a teenager is not a girl, technically. They're a young lady. So if you say teenage girl, it sounds wrong legally. And that's what the Talmud is, of course, honing in on. So they give an alternative.
So Rabbi Padat says it means a minor girl from the town of Ne'oran.
Right. So she was a Ketana, but she came from Ne'oran, right? Which is Na'ara, they're using as an adjective, right? That she was a Na'aranite, and a minor girl. So they want to unclutter this for us. A problem you probably didn't even know you needed solved.
That's right.
Okay. But with that in mind, and a reminder that he's already been taking captives and slaves from these places, we move on to see exactly why there's even a more long-standing reason why Aram would be in trouble here.
The Holy One, blessed be he, said, "You, Lavan, have shown this loving kindness to Jacob, my servant, and I also will give you and your sons your reward in this world. So there will be no reward for the wicked in the future world. As it is said, now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Aram, because by him the Lord had given victory unto Aram."
All right, so it's an odd phrase that I allowed us to slide over because I knew we were coming back to the commentary, which is, why is the beginning of chapter 5 in Kings 2 telling us that Naaman was favored by God, was given victory by God, right? And the Midrash here is saying that's because God was giving him his success now so that there would be nothing left to reward him for later on, right? So yes, Lavan did a couple nice things for Jacob. Mostly it was bad, but he did a couple nice things. And so God said, great, Aram, which is Lavan's people and their descendants, you can have your reward here. That way I don't have to deal with you in the world to come, in the afterlife, right? You get whatever you deserve right here and right now, and then the bill is squared, and you don't get to come to the after party, right? You just gone. And the idea here is that Naaman and Aram as a whole is a descendant of Lavan, and so they are enjoying the fruits of those few acts of kindness he did here, so that God doesn't have to actually reward them in the afterlife. So you shouldn't be put off by the idea that God is helping him here. It's not really help. It's just cashing in his chips early, so he won't be there for later on. Make sense?
So
Okay.
he's family.
He's family. Well, Aram is family. I mean, all of the nations around Israel were family. That none of the neighbors that surrounded us were completely disassociated from us. They all had some interconnectedness, either directly or one step removed. But this is Lavan's people. Okay, but what did Naaman do specifically? Well, Rashi tries to help us here.
Naaman drew back his bow innocently and killed Achav.
Okay, so there is an unnamed soldier at the end of the first book of Kings, in chapter 22, verse 34, where it says the person pulls back their bow and they fire, often gets translated randomly. I would argue unwittingly, to say that he wasn't aiming for Achav. He was simply aiming into the mass of people. And lo and behold, that arrow killed Achav, the previous king of the northern tribes. So what did Naaman do that earned him the reward of his king? He killed the other guy's king.
Yeah.
Did he do it on purpose? It does not seem like he did it on purpose, which if you're noticing the connection to our unwitting sin, this is an unwitting benefit, maybe, or maybe it's something that he then took more credit for than perhaps he deserved. Well, yes, I got the king because I was really aiming for him. No, I just shot it up in the air and it happened to fall down on the guy. It's like, it's the misinterpretation of the biotapestry of the idea of Harold being shot in the eye, which probably historically wasn't what happened to him in 1066 Battle of Hastings. It sounds like this was just a random shot and Naaman got lucky. But apparently he got so lucky that he became quite famous for this, or at least became prominent in the king's army. Make sense? Okay. Which still hasn't told us why he deserves Tzara'at. Pardon?
That's how Saul died too, right? From a random arrow?
He got injured. I mean, it's like the beginning of the end, yes. But he doesn't actually die because there's the whole exchange between him and his son and everything. So it's not a one-shot and dead. All right. So why get it at all? Well, let's look at the Tzara'at issue more generally.
Gog, since he vaunts himself upward in the world, I will smite him with leprosy, as stated in Zechariah. And this shall be the plague with which the Lord will smite all the peoples who have warred against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall rot away while they stand on their feet.
Not good. And he's interpreting that as being Tzara'at, right? As being this leprosy.
For what reason? Because they engaged in battle with Israel.
Right? If you come and fight against Israel, then don't be surprised if God punishes you, because God does not want you to do this.
And so it is stated in Zechariah, and this shall be the plague, because they came against Israel. And do not be surprised, as behold, the Lord exacts heavy retribution in leprosy from those who hate them, even in this world. And who was such a one? This was Naaman, of whom it is stated in Kings. Now, Naaman, the commander of the army of the king of Aram, but the man, though a valiant warrior, was a Metzorah. For what reason was he a Metzorah? Because he had taken a little girl captive from the land of Israel. In this world, God struck the idolaters with Tzara'at.
Right? So the idea being that Naaman was not a great guy. Right? He was this arrogant, prideful warrior who stole, little girls from their homes. And the fact that he got Tzara'at was deserved. Does that change how we feel about his cure? Right? Because again, we often think of Tzara'at as being leprosy, and we think, well, leprosy is something that should be treated and cured. And thank God in the modern world we have cures for leprosy, which is why you don't hear about it being a problem anymore. But was an intentional punishment. Unlike leprosy, which just happens to people depending upon the circumstances, Tzara'at is a divinely ordained disability. And that means maybe we shouldn't be looking happily upon his cure. And yet, Elisha cured him, which would, of course, mean God cured him. So we can be maybe scratching our heads a little bit as we try to untangle this.
So the same thing that led to the Tzara'at, basically kidnapping this little girl, is the same thing that leads to his cure?
Because he listens. Right? The same thing that led to its Tzara'at had within it the seeds of the cure if he was willing to actually pay attention. Think about it for a second about the progress of Naaman, right? He begins as this arrogant warrior, right? Probably inflated because of his lucky shot with an arrow that had no right to do anything that was noteworthy in the first place. And then he continues raiding and taking these captives, including a little girl. And she offers, through his wife, the advice that he should go to Samaria, the place that he's been raiding and hurting, to get cured. And he chooses to listen to her advice. Right? That is his first step towards being fixed. He's willing to say, this little girl who is a captive and slave from the land that I've been raiding has something to say to me that's worth hearing. Right? How many people do you know that just in positions of his would have said, some stupid foreign peasant girl slave is telling me how to take care of myself? I'll go to the priests of our own temple. I'll go to whatever passes for medicine. I'm not going to listen to some, stupid poor peasant slave girl from the foreign country. But he chose to listen. So that was the first seed.
But is there any evidence that there was this alternative that he could have got to a priest from his own temple, or was this his last hope?
did.
Well, from external sources, we know that many of the ancient world had all sorts of different cures and techniques for handling different issues.
He might have gone there and then nothing happened.
Exactly.
This would have been his last hope, though.
But there are many people who who would refuse to take the last hope if it came from the wrong source. I'd rather die than listen to somebody like that, or humble myself in this way, or even just going to Samaria at all for something that he couldn't get at home seemed offensive to him. That's why he was hoping for some big flashy magic ritual. That would cover him, right? If you can say, I went there and man, I'll tell you, it was the most amazing show ever, right? Fireworks and lightning and clouds. Then people can say, okay, well, yeah, I guess you couldn't get that at home. But if he goes there and the guy says, take 2 of these and call me in the morning, it's like, well, I could have stayed home and done that. And now people are going to think I'm an idiot for coming all the way to this whole bunk little town that we've been, beating up. It's all about the pride and the arrogance. But he was willing to have that little bit of humility to take the last resort and to be willing to humble himself to do it. Now, he was still arrogant when he arrived. He still thought he was having to do this transaction with gold and silver to show the importance of his trip and all of that, and then to go to the king rather than directly to go to the prophet. But by the end of it, he has transformed. Right? It's not a one-step process, but this is the first step, is listening to the girl. All right.
And for those who know Yiddish and bring in human terms, every time I see Tza'arat, I think of tzoros, which are problems. Whatever he does it wrong, he's going to get tzoros from God.
Unfortunately.
Right? And so there are also some who say Tza'arat also comes from haughtiness. How is that shown? From Naaman, as stated in Kings. Now, Naaman, the commander of the army of the king of Aram, a valiant warrior, was a leper because he was haughty.
Right, so Tanhuma tries to directly connect his arrogance to the outbreak of the Tzaraat. It wasn't just because he was a warrior and because he fought, it was a particular arrogance that went with him. All right, now, Akedat Yitzchak from the 1400s, just because some of what he's about to say is going to sound modern, I want you to be reminded that he's coming from the 1400s, is going to try and bring together this idea of then how does Elisha bring him over? How does he transform his understanding of what's going on in the world and get him to reflect properly and really then cure him? Because again, Elisha doesn't cure him by waving his hands. He cures him by changing the spiritual state of Naaman inside. And that is what is then reflected by the outside. And I'll say it very, very clearly. The waters of the Jordan had nothing to do with his cure. Right? The waters were nothing. It was choosing to humble himself and do what this man said, and do it despite its complete lack of grandeur and stature, or even betterness compared to his home in Damascus. That was what made the cure happen. But how did Elisha know that this was what to do? And how do we deal with people in similar circumstances?
It is a sacred duty for a teacher who wants to succeed to acquire 2 qualities. 1, he must be competent in the subject he teaches. He must possess pedagogical skills. And 2, he must sincerely like the pupil. Failing these preconditions, he is not likely to succeed in his task. The wisdom of someone who hates him will not benefit a person much, nor will the love of a fool.
Right, so make sure when you're finding a teacher, you don't want a lovable fool who just really, really loves you, but is an idiot and not very good at their subject. And you also don't want someone who's brilliant, but is a jerk, because they make a lousy teacher as well. Unfortunately, sometimes it seems those are the 2 options for people being hired to different positions. Really, we want both qualities.
The brilliant Ahithophel, who hated David, is an example of point number 1, whereas the love of Eve in persuading Adam to follow the advice of the servant illustrates point number 2. God is described as a loving father in many verses in the Bible. He is also described as teaching us. We have then in God the ideal teacher, since as father he has our best interest at heart, and since he is the source of all knowledge, he is the teacher, pedagogue par excellence.
All right, so we got the best teacher around, because God is both loving as well as infinitely wise. Great. So how does this get into practice dealing with different types of students? Because not all students are handled the same way.
Mankind is divided into 3 categories. A, there are people who do not believe in any God, do not believe that their very existence is due to anything but chance. B, there are people who are very religious. They believe in a variety of deities, powers, but fail to recognize God as the creator and primary cause. And C, those who believe in the true creator. The first group will not question why no mention is made of the soul or its survival.
Meaning throughout the Torah, the soul and the survival of the soul is never explicitly described or gone into much detail. There are hints and there are allusions, but it is not a dominant topic. And God doesn't go around saying, do what's right because of the afterlife. That comes in rabbinic literature, but not in the Torah itself.
This is because, as far as they are concerned, they cannot imagine any abstract intelligence at all. Or because they feel that if there were such abstract intelligences, they would be subject to totally different rules of existence from those governing human life.
Right, and those were many of the ancient philosophers had that position, right? They did believe there might be a creator God, but that creator God was so far removed from our world that there was no point even really discussing, thinking, let alone imagining you could connect with. So it was as close to being an atheist while still allowing that there might be a God somewhere in the universe's existence. The second group, on the other hand,
admits that there is a survival of the soul, but they do not consider observance of Torah laws the vehicle by means of which one attains such an objective. An example is Islam, which considers afterlife the exclusive domain of members of that religion. The third group, Jews, are of course entitled to ask why Torah does not describe the survival of the soul as the reward for the observance of its statutes.
Right, so we are the ones who are left asking the hard question, right? Because the first group isn't asking the question because they don't believe in anything. The second group doesn't ask the question because they don't think Torah has the answer, because they have their own imagination of how you get to the afterlife. The third group are the ones who say, wait, hold on. If there is an afterlife and the Torah is the right way to get there, why doesn't God connect those explicitly into the Torah and say, here is the promise of afterlife for those who keep my commandments?
We don't have to answer group one, the atheist, since had Torah promised survival of the soul, they would have ridiculed such a promise. Even the most advanced of that group considers that the advantage man enjoys over other creatures lies only in the fact that some of us possess superior intelligence, enabling us to unravel some of the mysteries of nature.
Right, which, again, for the 1400s is an amazingly modern statement. Right? You could easily imagine Richard Dawkins saying, the only difference between us and other animals is the fact that we've got thumbs and a slightly bigger brain. Right, and that's it. There's no spirit, there's no soul, there's nothing about us that's unique compared to every other animal on Earth. It's just, bigger brain, and we can hold iPads.
Right. But why would that be true of the religious Jewish people, since this has been passing down for thousands of years at this point?
But they're not. He's talking about the first group, meaning the atheist group, the materialists, as he's going to describe them.
People of such orientation could never be persuaded by the promise of anything that could not be verified in this life. The promise of the soul's survival would not motivate them to perform mitzvot then. Just imagine what would have been the impact on a man such as Naaman, the Syrian general, who was healed of Ta'arat by the good offices of the prophet Elisha. Had he been promised eternal life for believing in the good prophet and the God of Israel, this would not have impressed him. Being cured of his affliction, however, instantly made a convert out of him.
All right, so notice what Akedat Yitzchak is trying to tell us here about how Elisha chose to deal with Naaman. Right, Naaman, he's arguing, would have been in the first category, somebody who was wholly materialistic. Right, maybe he sort of believed there were gods somewhere, but it wasn't obviously an importance to his own mind, or else he would have been focused on only his own gods and doing whatever he thought that they said would help him with his issue. Instead, he came loaded with cash, right? Because that's the materialist calling card, is my money, it tells me what's valuable and shows you what you should do for me. And he came expecting that would be the transaction. And Elisha worked with it and subverted it, right? Elisha didn't say, I don't need your money, right? Because you can be cured simply by believing in God, because, then your soul will be forever and ever and ever. You would have laughed at him. You're offering my soul eternity. I don't want my soul's eternity. I want my tzarat to go away, right? And so that was what he used as the bridge. He used a physical benefit, but done in such a means that it would actually transform the soul that the guy didn't seem to care about. And then in the process, he had to say at the end, and keep your money, right? In order to seal the deal that this was really not about transaction, he had to say, I don't want the stuff. Which, by the way, is, if you continue reading chapter 5, why it is so painful when Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, runs after Naaman and asks for stuff, totally undermining the message that Elisha was trying to give, which is why Elisha is the teacher and Gehazi is the idiot student. But let's just go ahead and finish up because we're already running over time.
So where it says, if you will walk in accordance with my laws,
Mhm.
that refers to conduct in consonance with natural law established by God. Freedom of choice has been given to man to enable him to live either in accordance with natural law or to defy it. The result of exercising this freedom negatively can be catastrophic.
Right. So I highly recommend, and you can find the rest of Akedat Yitzchak on Sefaria.org, great website that I've mentioned numerous times, to keep reading for the additional comments that he makes. But we'll leave it at that note that the idea ultimately is that depending upon who you're dealing with, there are ways to bring them to the realization of there is a true God, there are true ways of living, and the ways we live matter. And that should be the cornerstone for how we try to get people to move. But each person, there does need to be some adaptation of helping to bridge that gap from wherever they are to where they need to be. And it's not be looked upon, no matter how many material elements seem to be implied between sacrifices and all of that we're going to go through in Vayikra, it should not be looked upon as though the material elements are the actual effective elements. They are symbols of what is happening on a spiritual level. They are not magic ingredients.
I was looking here, it says the king rents his clothes.
Tears,
Tears.
rending.
Oh,
Yeah,
she meant rent them out.
yeah. It's
You know,
tearing.
it's R-E-N-T.
Yes, I know.
Rent,
Yeah,
yes,
it's
but
Yes, yes.
rent,
exactly. It's one of those irregular verbs.
Something like,
It was seeking Shiva.
oh,